For anyone researching family from the United States, probably one of the first places you're going to be looking are the US Federal Censuses. And these have been around from the 1790s until today, and usually are enumerated every 10 years. Now, as you're going to see, with regards to the US Federal Censuses, between both Ancestry.com and FamilySearch, you can access pretty much all of them. Now, there is one year, the 1890 US Federal Census, which most of it was destroyed in a fire and cannot be accessed. But besides for that, you can pretty much view the images of all these censuses up until the year 1940. And the reason for that is there are some laws on the books in the United States which only allow censuses to be released after a certain period of time has gone by. Therefore, every 10 years you're going to have a new census come out. So for now we have up until the 1940 census, but actually in 2022, so this upcoming year, the 1950 US Federal Census will be released, and eventually I will do a video on that one specifically. But for now, this is going to be a more general, broad overview on federal censuses. I'm Yona Paley, and I believe genealogy is fun. And on this episode, we're going to be taking a dive through some of the tactics and strategies you can use in order to maximize your search through the United States federal censuses. The reason that these documents are so important for genealogy is that they contain a huge amount of information. First of all, you get groupings of families living with each other. So sometimes that means, parents living with their children. Other times you might even be so lucky as to get uncles and aunts, cousins, and different family members that may have resided with a family at a certain time. So sometimes even when you don't know who somebody's siblings are, you might find them showing up for maybe one year, living with their family on that census. And if you go through the censuses and make sure to get every single one that's available, you can greatly maximize the amount of potential family members that you can find. Sometimes you can even get other bits of information that can be very useful. So, for instance, for family members who have immigrated to the United States, what year approximately or exactly that they came to America. Sometimes it will say what year they submitted their papers for naturalization. For women, a lot of times it will say how many children they had born and how many are still living. So when you're trying to trace a family where, you think there's a certain number of kids, but you can't really figure it out, well, sometimes the census will give you that bit of information. And that's all on top of the fact that you're going to get occupation, socioeconomic status, and other little bits that show up here and there on the censuses. So let's say you're trying to research your family and you can't really find them on the federal censuses. The first thing you're going to do is very basic, and we would do this with anything in genealogy, which is you're going to try the very standard basic tricks for narrowing down your search field. So that includes wildcards, so the asterisk, the quotation mark, which you can use in order to tell the software that you're searching by exact or by contains, things like that. You can also plug in different parameters into the search function. So let's say you know that somebody's first name was John and their last name was a long, complicated surname. You can search by, the first 3 letters of the last name, because maybe whoever was writing it down, whoever was transcribing these documents, just simply misread it or it was miswritten when the census was taken. So you're going to want to try different variations of these names. Now, this can only get you so far, so I want to talk also about what you would do if you've plugged every single variation of a name in, and you looking and looking and looking for your family in the census, and you think, well, maybe they just aren't on there. Well, maybe they're not on there, but maybe they are. And the best way to try to narrow down whether somebody is on a census or not is to search by address. And unfortunately, this isn't always as easy as it sounds, but there are a couple of really useful ideas that I'm going to present to you. The first is even figuring out what address they might have lived at. And you can do this by taking documents from a similar era that you have of your family member and trying to search by that address. So let's say you have a 1923 naturalization document and you're trying to find them on the 1920 US Federal Census. Well, there's a chance if they lived in 1923 at a certain address, then maybe they lived there in 1920. But let's say you have a World War I draft card from 1917 and it has a different address as the one in the 1923 one. So then you're going to have two addresses that you're going to want to look for because they could show up either in that one or the other one. And this can be used in conjunction with US state censuses, which you're going to find a lot of times. These can make things a lot easier. So New York State, for instance, had a 1915, a 1925 census. So if someone shows up in the 1923 document living at a certain address, well, there's a good chance they might show up on either the 1920 US Federal Census or the 1925 New York State Census living at that address. But the first thing first is you're going to want to get the addresses that your relatives may have lived in a certain time period. So now you have your address, and what can you do? Well, you can go to Ancestry's search function, and for some of the censuses, they will allow you to search by house number. So you'd want to type in the house number of the address, and then under the keyword function, you can put the street name. And this doesn't have to be the entire street name. If it's a couple of words, I mean, you can really just put in a word, select exact, matches exact, and then if the census is well indexed, then you may be able to find them by using this. But then let's say you have searched through this function and you still cannot find their address on the census. Well, thankfully there's an amazing website run by a guy named Steve Morse, and he has a number of genealogical tools that are very well known in the community, and one of those tools is a enumeration district finder where you can find the address on Google Maps that you're trying to look for, and then select the street from the drop-down list, and then also all of the streets that are next to it. And by doing this, it can usually narrow down the address to one or maybe a few sections of the census. So that way you don't have to worry about, looking through millions of people's names. You can narrow it down by district within a city, and then what's going to happen, let's say you've narrowed it down to, one book of the census. And sometimes these books can be, pretty big. They can be 50, 60, 70, maybe even more pages. And in other cases, you get lucky and they're only, 20 or 30 pages. But what you can do is you've found the book that contains that address, and you just start from page 1, and you flip through it, you look for the street number, and you once you find the address that you're looking for, you can have a look at everybody who's listed under that address. Sometimes you'll get lucky and they will show up, and maybe they were just transcribed completely wrong, or maybe they were living under a different surname, but there you go, you have the address right in front of you. Since this method of searching for your family can be a little bit tedious because you have to flip page by page through the census, and there's no guarantee that you're going to find them, and every once in a while you're going to look through, 100 pages of census pages, still not find anything, I like to consider this the nuclear option. So it's the option you should use when you have tried everything else and you still can't find your family listed on the census, and then most of the time you'll be able to at least find the address and determine whether your family shows up listed on that address or not. So there you go, how to use your family's address from another document in order to potentially learn where your family lived. because you really want to try to get as many of these censuses as possible. They really do contain great information, and they are the bread and butter of genealogy, along with vital records. And that wraps up this episode. If you liked it, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. As always, I'm looking forward to bringing you more videos as well as tips and tricks that you can use in your own genealogy research. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll get you next time.